Hey, this is Chairman Evan Power. Thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of Power Play. Today we have State Representative Juan Porras. He's going to talk about his starting a Turning Point chapter with Charlie Kirk. He's going to talk about homeowners associations. He's going to talk about the legislature, and he's going to talk about mixing his role as a state committee man in Miami-Dade County and being a legislator. And we'll talk a little bit about TikTok and social media. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Representative, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Chairman.
So my first job was working for Marco Rubio. I hear that's the same for you. How was that, and how did that lead you to a career in running for office?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be here, obviously, without our great now Secretary, Marco Rubio. Funny story, my first semester in college, Senator Rubio was actually my professor for international political theory, and I was actually a bio major at that time. I had no interest in politics yet. And through his guidance, his experience, he offered me an internship after that semester, and I ended up working for other great conservative leaders like Rick Scott, like multiple members of the legislature, and eventually I was crazy enough to run for office myself.
So you won, you're the first Gen Z member of the House. Mm-hmm. What is that like being a young member of the legislature, and do people treat you differently?
Yeah, I think I have a huge responsibility, obviously, to be a voice, not just for Miami-Dade, but also for the next generation of conservative leadership. That obviously goes in hand with what's going on now with the Turning Point and the Charlie Kirk situation. And I personally, Charlie was a huge friend to me, and we actually have legislation now in Tallahassee honoring his life and his leadership, one that I'm filing in the House designating a road to his movement. And also I think we have a day of remembrance that another member of the House has sponsored as well.
And I think people don't quite understand how important Charlie Kirk is to probably the younger part of our movement. I mean, I was a younger member of the RNC when I got elected, and Charlie and Tyler Boyer took me in and explained, and I was endorsed by them when I ran for re-election because, we tried to shake things up at the RNC to continue to advocate for young people. But you started a Turning Point chapter at FIU, didn't you?
I actually started the first ever Turning Point chapter at Florida International University back in 2015 with people like Triana Sixto, like Charlie, like Tyler at that time. I was 18 years old. I think Charlie was 21. We were both very new in the conservative movement, but I think the footprints that he left, I think, are the successes that we're seeing in the conservative and the Republican movement, especially now in Florida. I mean, in the last presidential election, President Trump, I think, was the first Republican candidate for president that won the Gen Z or the youth vote, I think, in decades. And I think, it would not be fair to not attribute that to Charlie and the Turning Point movement as well.
Well, I think they made being conservative kind of cool again, if you will. Yeah. I mean, I think we're here doing a podcast for the Republican Party of Florida, which we probably wouldn't be doing without the Charlie Kirks of the world, who opened up a whole new generation to communicating. And I know that you do TikToks now, you do all kinds of things. Do you find that approaching politics from that kind of public media standpoint helps you as a representative?
Absolutely. I think social media especially is such an evolving game, and we as elected representatives, it's our job to really be communicators and not just communicate what we're doing in Tallahassee and what our messaging looks like, but also telling people what's going on in their communities and what they can do about it. And that's, I think, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram Reels, as funny as some of it is and as quirky as it may sound, I think a lot of people it really resonates to them. Me personally, back home, I also do a lot of Spanish radio. I have a very large Hispanic population, and I do a weekly show where I talk about what's going on in Tallahassee in English and in Spanish, and people call in, and you'd be surprised. I generally don't have enough time, honestly, to answer questions most of the time.
Spanish radio is kind of a one-of-a-kind kind of experience. An election day, we went down to Miami and we did some of that. And one of our friends, Andres, who works around here, they came back to him and said, Evan just did 30 minutes in Spanish radio, all in Spanish. And he was like, he doesn't know Spanish. But we got through it. But it's a one-of-a-kind experience because they talk about issues in a way that I think we see on TikTok and all these other public media. They've been doing it for generations. Right. But I think you interacting with your populace gives you some ideas for legislation. So I know homeowners associations is important to you. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So homeowner associations, I think, is the number one issue in my district. I represent southwest portion of Miami-Dade. No cities, but some of the largest HOAs in the state of Florida. And if anyone Googles the Hammocks HOA, you can see that it was the largest organized crime bust, I think, in our state's history since the 1980s. You had people hiding money from their HOA in the floorboards for years and years of people that have no kind of accountability or transparency in these homeowner associations. So ever since I've been elected to the House, I've made it kind of my mission to put in more transparency measures and frankly, have the conversation of whether or not we should even have HOAs. In my opinion, they're more of a failed experiment. I have some ideas this year on how to regulate them more, but if we can't get to that point, I'd like to see a world where we start having the conversation of whether or not, they should exist.
Well, you talk about hiding money. That's a Florida man experience. If anyone's going to do hiding in the floors for homeowners associations, it's Florida. Beyond that, you're a member of the state executive committee. You're a state committee of the Republican Party. You're a state committee man. How is holding a party position and being a legislator at the same time? How is that experience, and what do you get from both of those?
Yeah, I mean, I had some very big shoes to fill. The previous state committee man was Kevin Cabrera, who's now the U.S. ambassador to Panama. But obviously, it's using the successes that we have had in Miami-Dade County. Obviously, thanks to you, Chairman, for the Republican Party of Florida, but also our leaders in Miami-Dade like Alex Rizzo, who's a former chair, Kevin Cooper, who's our current chair, and making sure that Miami-Dade continues to be a voice, not just in the legislature, but in our party and in our messaging. It's very easy, obviously, being such a big county, having such a diverse cast of characters, to get lost in the weeds and have, some infighting here and there. But I think it's important as a party that we continue to be unified. And it's my job, obviously, in Miami-Dade County to make sure we continue to do so. Hey guys, it's State Representative Juan Porras. If you like what you're watching, like and subscribe to this video for more awesome content from the Republican Party of Florida, and stay tuned for more conservative leaders in the next couple episodes.
And talk about unifying is that a couple of years ago, people said Miami was a lost cause. Republicans wouldn't be able to win. Yet we flipped Miami-Dade County in voter registration and in performance. For the first time since 1988, we won a presidential race in Miami-Dade County, and now we own the voter registration advantage. So thanks to your hard work on that. And where do you think that sets Miami up as we move forward?
I think, Miami is just a direct success to the rest of what we've done in Florida as a whole. But Miami and Florida is really, I think, the model for the rest of the country. When it comes to conservative leadership, we have such iconic, leaders in our state. I mean, obviously, from the White House all the way to the Senate to the Congress, we have people like Secretary Rubio, Susie Wiles, all these awesome people that are, the biggest leaders in our conservative movement, coming down and seeing that leadership and making sure that we have a good bench and a good step forward for the next couple of years is something that I'm personally going to be passionate about.
And I think we saw that in the last presidential election. What people don't quite understand, I don't think sometimes, is we were winning Miami-Dade months out, and we knew that.
Right.
But they took the messaging, the RNC did, the Trump campaign took the messaging and from Miami and moved it to Arizona and some of the other places. And that's why Donald Trump wins the Hispanic population, because what we're doing in Florida kind of echoes across the rest of the country.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to keep in mind that we cannot, let up the gas pedal. It's very easy for us as a party, I think as a state, to rest on our laurels and say we're the best state in the union, which I think we are. For many reasons, but we have to continue the messaging. We have to continue the grassroots across all angles, continue the communication that we just mentioned, Spanish radio, English radio, TikTok, Instagram Reels, making sure that people know that Florida is the pinnacle of what state politics should look like. And that's obviously, thanks to leaders like you, Chairman, and obviously our leaders in the legislature and the governor as well.
Yeah. And I think, when we talk about Florida leading the way, you wonder what's going to happen next. But I think, obviously, Mondami in New York, you've seen communism, but that has a distinct pull in places like Miami and South Florida for people who've come from those environments. What do you think it says about the Democrat Party on a national and a state level that someone like Mondami is going to be able to win in New York and like a full-blown communist is going to be able to be mayor of one of the largest cities in our country?
It's very frightening. And I do think the Democrat Party is essentially dead, not just here, especially here in Florida. But at the national level, you're seeing people that are nowhere near the same values that the Democratic Party has had in the last 10, 20, definitely more than 20 years ago in the past. People like Mamdani, I think we're going to see a rise in, unfortunately, not in Florida, hopefully. But we're going to see, I think, a mass exodus of all these people that have lived in New York City that are now going to be affected by this huge change in regulation and taxes come to states like Florida to see and obviously experience the leadership that we have had firsthand. So obviously it's an ever-growing issue that we're going to have to deal with in the legislature. Where do we house these people? Do we have the right infrastructure? Do we have the right education? But all of that is for naught if we don't continue, the leadership and the messaging that we have as a party. So I think on top of that, the legislative issues, I think the political issues will solve themselves, but we need to make sure we do a good job at home as well.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation with State Representative Juan Porras. If you like what you're watching, please like and subscribe and comment if you'd like to hear from someone that we haven't covered so far. And speaking of legislative issues, I think one of the biggest issues that will happen this session is property taxes. Mm-hmm. What is your view on property taxes? What role does it play? And where do we go on it?
That's a great question. I think this is the number one issue talked about right now. And I know, there's people all over the spectrum with ideas. I have one of the proposals that the House has put forward that would completely exempt all seniors over the age of 65 from all non-school related property taxes. This proposal would actually also preempt the cities and counties from cutting any sort of funding to law enforcement. It's very important. I truly believe that there is room for property tax relief, that we need to make sure that the people that have lived here, that have built these communities, still have the ability to live in the same homes that they've had their whole lives. I'm also of the opinion that we should protect public education and our law enforcement. I do think, obviously, we as Americans have to tighten our belts when it comes to our budgets at home. And I do think that these cities and these municipalities have to learn how to do the same. I think, the CFO and the governor have done a great job with their DOGE efforts that have kind of highlighted some of where this government misspending is happening. But it's important to keep in mind that, for example, public education is something that the state would have to completely fund if we were to get rid of the school ad valorem taxes, and law enforcement obviously would be severely cut if we eliminated all kinds of property taxes. So I'm of the opinion that people over the age of 65 and older should be entitled to this first off. And if obviously we see some great successes and we don't see some of the damage that we've been told, we'll continue to expand and hopefully get to a place where we can eliminate all property taxes in the future.
What other issues do you think are going to be big in this legislative session? Because last year there was some infighting. Obviously, I think we got beyond that now. What are property tax? You talked about HOAs. What other issues are going to be ripe for the legislature to take a look at?
That's a great question, Chairman. So, obviously property taxes and HOAs take a lot of my time, but there's a huge issue right now with deregulation, especially in some of these state agencies. We've seen, I think, a lot of government bloat, not just in our cities, but sometimes in our state. And it's kind of our job to show, that we have some kind of accountability of how we spend our money as well. And we've had several committees in the House where we've seen some of the spending go astray. So obviously in some of these agencies, we should be taking a look at and making sure that we're transparent, that we're holding them accountable. But obviously, the legislature is always an interesting day every 60 days that we're up here. So I foresee a whole slew of issues that we're going to have to debate and discuss. But that's the beauty of the legislature, and that's the beauty of being in a legislative body and being in a supermajority Republican legislature. And I think we have the honor of doing that, unlike a lot of other states.
Well, excellent. I love the idea that Florida leads the way. We can't handicap that. But Thank you for joining me today on this Power Play. And I'm glad we got to introduce you to our viewers. Is there any last words you want to leave them with?
Follow me on TikTok at RepJCP. Follow my Instagram as well at Juan Carlos Porras FL. And look for me also when it comes to our Republican events. And down in Miami-Dade, if you're ever listening to Spanish radio, come say hi as well.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chairman. Hey guys, State Representative Juan Porras. If you want to see what we're doing in the community, follow my social media handles. It's Juan Carlos Porras FL on Instagram. On X, it's Juan Porras FL. And on TikTok, it's RepJCP. Thank you guys, and like and follow.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Power Play with Representative Juan Porras. From a start with Marco Rubio to his experiments with social media. He's the youngest member of the legislature, the first Gen Z member. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Remember to like and subscribe this and follow him on TikTok.